Yo, Saturnalia, everyone. Wonderful Thursday, December the 21st, the winter solstice, and traditionally one of the days of Saturnalia in the ancient Roman calendar. We're going to talk about Saturnalia is and what its different from Christmas, what its differences from Christmas are. I thought that would be an interesting thing to do. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, especially in the realm of religion, that I would love to talk about right now with like the Pope, and the recent pronouncements from the Vatican on blessing gay marriages and stuff like that would be pretty interesting to talk about. Of course, my prediction last week came true. Someone smashed that Satan statue in the Iowa Capitol, and of course now they have rewritten the laws, or they're going to be rewriting the laws that are going to make it much harder to get any displays up. So, congratulations, everyone, for doing exactly what I said. So, I always appreciate being proven right, I suppose. Anyway, all of that is neither here nor there. I wanted to talk about something more related to Christmas. I can always talk about that stuff at another time, but since this is my last new thing before the Christmas break, I thought I would do something much more Christmas focused. So, to start us off today, we're going to talk about this passage from Luke. Really, we're more going to mention it because I'm going to come back to it later. So, we're going to look at this passage from Luke 2, 8 through 15. This is the shepherds and the angels. And this is what it says. Luke says, "And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over the flocks at night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified." I always remember that King James version. "And they were sore afraid. But the angel said to them, 'Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find the baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger.' Suddenly, a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, 'Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests.' When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, 'Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about.'" So that is what we're talking about today. We're actually going to be comparing Christmas and Saturnalia. Now, the reason that I want to do this, so you might be like, "I don't even know what Saturnalia is, Pastor George." I think I've mentioned it on previous videos because, every year you get an untold amount of garbage pushed into whatever feed, news thing that you're doing, all talking about, how Christmas is a pagan holiday, right? I mean, this is not something that's just believed by like secular people, but it was really actually pushed by Protestants, believe it or not. If you study the Reformation, that doesn't surprise you, but it was pushed by Protestants as a way to divorce like superstitious practices in the church from biblical concepts, right? Most famously, this happened in England with the Puritans and with other groups, which is why actually Christmas wasn't celebrated by a lot of Presbyterians for quite some time. So interesting to remember that as we talk about our traditions every year, right? That the tradition of Presbyterians celebrating Christmas is actually quite recent. All that is to say that is this true? Well, I've talked about this before, right? I mean, what caused is stuff like this, right? The reason for the season, and this was made by someone who's like, well, actually, all of our Christmas traditions come from other places. Now, there's things that are obviously wrong about this. For instance, like talks about the Iranian god Mithra, born of a virgin, which is not true. He wasn't. A Wikipedia article could tell you that on December 25th. Like, that's completely made up, right? And I've gone through this before. Like, I remember one, it's in here. I did a whole video on is Christmas pagan, and I looked at like a thing like this and kind of just ripped it apart because, like here it's like gift giving. It's like gift giving happens in every culture. There's it has nothing to do with religion really. It's a common practice. People give each other things that they would like, and so it's interesting to think about this, but I wanted to talk about because I also love classical history. I love ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I studied ancient Greek, studied Latin. I love this stuff. I have a real heart for understanding the ancient world, trying to understand the ancient world anyway. So I love this. And so I wanted to talk about Saturnalia and compare what that was celebrating. Some of the things we know, because obviously we don't know everything about stuff that was going on. And Christmas, and what Christmas is celebrating. So first, I think it's important to know who Saturn is. Saturn is the actually, it's very complicated. It's tough to know who Saturn and why he was worshipped. Obviously, most of us are familiar with the name Saturn because of the planet, and because it's a very distinct one, right? It has that cool ring around it. So we all, for many people, it's their favorite planet, which I totally understand. It was mine for a long time. I'm a Neptune guy now because I don't know. I've always liked Poseidon and Neptune as like the god of the sea type thing. So I decided to shift my allegiance to the Neptune planet. Anyway, Saturn. So most of the Roman deities, most of the gods the Romans worshipped were very, very similar to the Greek gods. So much so that like really you could one-to-one most of them, like Neptune and Poseidon, right? Sure, there's differences in how they were worshipped, but the Romans themselves did this, right? Well, god of the sea, same guy, different name, right? Makes sense. Mars and Ares. They call it Aphrodite and Venus. Most of the planet names have the Roman naming convention for them. So Uranus is Zeus, for instance. Oh no, Uranus is Uranos, which is Zeus's father. Jupiter is Zeus. Things like that. Minerva and Athena, right? Like you can draw parallels. Saturn is one of those gods from the ancient Romans that really did not have a Greek parallel, like an easy one. Like some people say it's Pluto, which Pluto is the Roman equivalent of Hades, but like Hades type figure, because Saturn is involved with the Earth. He's the one who is underground. Now, some people think it's Cronus. The Greek god Cronus is kind of like Saturn. We don't really know. It's possible. But Saturn is what we call a chthonic deity, which means he has stuff to do with the earth. And so he's of like fertility, which is why in this picture you can see right here, right, he's wearing a toga, and he's in the religious form of like where you would wrap it around your head. That's not how it normally was worn, but during religious ceremonies, Roman men would often take the upper band of the toga and wrap it around their head. He's carrying a scythe, or sickle rather. Scythe's the long form. He's carrying a sickle. Obviously a form of agriculture and fertility. So that's Saturn. That's the god Saturn. Very important to the Romans for agriculture, obviously, because you want to make sure that you have food. And they had lots of deities all about agriculture and fertility and stuff like that. But the biggest festival, well, it's always tough to tell, but one of the biggest festivals in the ancient Roman world was Saturnalia. And here's like a French artist painting of what Saturnalia looked like. I don't think this is exactly what it probably looked like, but it's a cool image, and I'm going to leave it up there because it gets at the point. You can see the image of Saturn in the background over there being worshipped and people at tables, and I'll explain everything here. So Saturnalia was a festival for Saturn, and some of the things that were done during it, people like to try and directly link to Christmas, like gift giving. Gift giving, not really, I would say, that unique to the Romans or anyone else or Christians. People give gifts all the time. But there were other really interesting things about Saturnalia. So, for instance, it reminds me of kind of, I don't know if you've ever seen Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. There's a scene in it where there's the Feast of Fools, which I think I've talked about before in a sermon or in other places. But the Feast of Fools was celebrated in Europe, really France, but it kind of spread out from there in the Middle Ages. And it was all about, like, in the movie they call it Topsy-Turvy Day. which is not what it was called in real life, but that gets you the idea, right? Where kind of society was flipped on its head, and people who were normally not able to be made fun of, or you had to show lots of reverence toward, you didn't have to do that anymore. And there was revelry and drinking. And it happened on January 1st, so also in the new year and around this time of year, right? And so in the Hunchback of Notre Dame, they have the King of Fools, and they make Quasimodo the King of Fools. You can see that going on here. That is very similar to Saturnalia, because in Saturnalia, a lot of roles would be reversed, and they would, so for instance, masters would serve slaves, which is a weird thing, right? But they would serve slaves, and they would do like, fun things for the slaves, like carry them around and things like that. Of course, lots of feasting and drinking, gambling, which actually was pretty. Obviously, it went on. I doubt that people didn't do it or whatever, but it was very heavily stigmatized in Roman society. It was sometimes outright banned in places. Again, just because it's banned doesn't mean people didn't do it. I'm sure there was tons of betting going on in the Roman world, but they looked down on it. But on this one day, gambling was allowed. Gifts were exchanged, but not like really fancy ones. They'd buy these little figurines that were kind of like gag gift things, and they'd give them to each other. And why did they do this, right? Well, one, you have lots of festivals that happen around this time of year in different cultures, especially in the northern hemisphere, because this is the time when things are getting darker. It's also where you can start breaking into your stores of the things that you've harvested, and enjoy them. And so that's what's going on as well. But why, that might be the temporal reason, right? You're able to have the stuff that you need to feast or whatever. But why did they do it this way? What's the purpose of these things? Well, Saturn was seen as being the god who ruled over, in the past, this golden age in parts of Roman mythology. If you want to know where maybe we've heard that term golden age before, that comes from Greek and Greco-Roman mythology, really the Greeks, that talk about how kind of over time things have gotten worse, right? So there was a golden age, there's a silver age, there's the age of heroes, there was all this type of stuff, and now we live in, I think it's the Bronze Age, I can't remember. But the idea here is that over time, right, things have just gotten worse as time has gone forward. That there used to be this great golden age, and this festival is to hearken back to that, right? To be like, wow, it's to look at the past. So the objective of Saturnalia is to look at the past and to remember all the great things that used to happen, right? Where there was more equality between people, where there was this more carefree state of innocence time period for humans, and things like that. That's not where we live now. That's kind of the point of Saturnalia, which is why everything's topsy-turvy, which is why it has this festival type atmosphere, Mardi Gras type atmosphere even. There was even caroling, but it was naked and door to door, right? So it's just very bizarre and weird to us, but that's the whole point, is to draw this connection back to the past, right? When humans were more innocent, things like that. Now, I think that's important to realize, right? So that's Saturnalia, very interesting holiday, and things like that. And Romans, fascinating people. I think about them at least 10 times a day. But Christmas compared with that, right? And that's why I chose this passage from Luke. So in the Roman world, right, in Saturnalia, which we're told that Christmas comes from, and is in every way by people, even though it's not, even though there's serious differences, even though they happen on different days, right? Saturnalia would happen earlier and end usually by the 23rd of December, if not before. It wasn't always set that many. It was at least one day. Sometimes it would be more. Other times, but Christmas has been set at December 25th, and I think I've talked about the reason for that just real briefly. The reason is that the feast of Jesus's, of the Assumption, not the Assumption, sorry, of the Oh gosh, what is it called? Where Angel Gabriel appears to Mary. I can't think of the word for it right now. It'll probably come to me in like an hour or something like that. I just can't remember. But the Annunciation, that's what it's called. The Feast of the Annunciation happens earlier in the year. And so they set the church, what the church did is they set a perfect 9-month date because Jesus was perfect, so he had a perfect 9-month delivery. That's basically it. And it goes there to there. And so December 25th is nine months later. Now, did they borrow customs from if you lived in certain areas? I'm sure. But a lot of people will say, oh, the church decided to put it there because it's in which there's no proof of. Like, that's actually just conjecture. So if we're supposed to believe the sources, we have to take what people at the time said, which was the 9-month thing. So just an interesting, and that I'm not saying that's 100% correct. That's just how the church determined it because it's tied up with Easter and all these other types of things. So we have that, right? We have people claiming it, but outside of these like really flimsy connections, what's the difference between these two? And the difference between Christmas and Saturnalia is, at least in the way that they're envisioned, is Christmas doesn't point us backwards, right? I often think maybe the best example of this might be A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, right? Because in that you have the three spirits of Christmas, right? You have the Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future. And the whole point of those ghosts, right, is to point Scrooge to how he's supposed to change his life going forward. Right? It's not something about looking back in the past. Christmas is very sentimentalized for many of us. I'm sure we all have great memories of when we were growing up at home with our families during Christmas time, or friends, or whoever else remembering those. I do, right? But like the point of Christmas, to remove it from our normal way of viewing it, right, the kind of secular holiday that it's becoming, is pointing it to the Bible, right? And like, what is, when people remember this, right, when we have this holiday, what's the point of it, right? Well, the point is not to look back at the past and remember that Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. That is a part of it. That's a major part of it, right? Because that's the day we're celebrating, the day of Jesus' birth. But like, the reason we celebrate Jesus' birth is not because he was born, right? That's not why. We celebrate the day of Jesus' birth because of what he would do, and the fact that it reminds us of God coming into the world, and that he will come again, right? This is why Advent means arrive. It comes from the Latin word adveni, or Adventus or something, which means to arrive. And so, like, Jesus is arriving. We have this holiday to remind us that he's going to come back. That's the purpose of Christmas, right? Because right here, what he says, do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. And glory to God in the highest, down in verse 13, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests, right? This idea that this is not just for these people, but it's for all people. And we read these words today, and if you look at the Christmas cards that have these are words for us, right? We tell each other this all the time. And that's how it should be, because we're always looking forward, reminding ourselves, yeah, God came into the world and he's coming back. So instead of looking backwards, like Saturnalia, right, to this lost supposed golden age of human innocence in the past, right? This would be like us having a holiday where we celebrated the Garden of Eden and we all ran around naked and did whatever we wanted or something like that, right? That would be like more like Saturnalia in spirit than Christmas, because Christmas pushes us forward. It reminds us that God is coming back, and we respond to that by evangelizing, right? By loving, by doing all the things that usually bear themselves out in a lot of the practices of Christmas that have come down over time, right? But in no ways are they. Is it supposed to be a present-focused mindset, but rather a future-focused one? So I thought that was pretty cool, because how often do we see trash like this? all the time. And I wanted to do something a little different. And of course, I'm a classics nerd, so I wanted to get that good stuff about Saturnalia in there. But I hope this was interesting to you. I hope you all have a good Saturnalia. Yo Saturnalia, as the Romans would say. But more importantly, that you have a wonderful Christmas. And I will see you next week, maybe to talk about some more crazy stuff that's happened in the world and what the Bible has to say about it. So have a wonderful rest of your Thursday and Merry Christmas. Peace out.